Hi, welcome back to Tie Dye Talk. I'm Jen, and this is Sugary Tie Dye. This is Barlow. Say hi to everybody, or don't. Do you have a favorite item that you use to tie your tie dye items with? That's an interesting question. Today I'm going to talk about the main three things that I use to tie my items with. The first one is rubber bands, the second is kite string, and the third is sinew. Rubber bands are cheap, easy, renewable, and the most economical of the three things that I use to tie my items with. I mainly use them for spirals. They won't do a super tight tie, but they do have a tendency to tighten up a little bit over time. So if I'm trying to tie something like such as a pleated circle or something like that, they do tend to buckle or cup the item, so I generally don't use them for that. They are pretty cheap and easy to find in stores that I visit locally. So that is a good potential for them. I reuse them. They do have a tendency to get sticky and degrade, and they get kind of gummy substance. What I do to remedy that is I will soak them in water with a little bit of vinegar before I use them a second time. I do rinse them off pretty good after I use them, but they just they're rubber and they're not meant to last forever. The second item that I use to tie my things with is kite string. I believe that kite string is the most versatile of the three items that I use. You can tie things really tightly, you can tie things loosely. It won't tighten up over time, such as what a rubber band will do. The problem I find is sometimes kite string is hard to find and hard to reuse. I guess if I was to cut it at the tie and then unwrap it and wrap it back around something, I could reuse it, but it's pretty time consuming if I was going to reuse the kite string. I use 50-pound weight string, and I like it mainly because I can control the tension of however tight I want to tie the item. The third item that I use to tie things with is sinew. Sinew is a synthetic, waxy based twine of some sort. It is more expensive. It's not overly reusable. I have tried reusing it in the past, and it it's not as good reusing it a second time as it is using it the first time. So I mainly use sinew for tying stuff like mandalas where I want to make a precise line, where I want to make a precise line across an item and have a white line through the product, such as for what I use for mandalas. I can tie sinew really, really tight. I don't necessarily have to tie it to begin using it. I usually wrap it around the item 3 or 4 times and pull on it, and you can feel it sort of lock into place. It is because it is waxy, it sticks to itself pretty easily. So when you tie stuff tightly and pull it, it'll lock to itself and it'll stick to itself. So it's not necessary to tie it when you're beginning or ending it. So I guess if I was to say that I have a favorite item to use when I tie my items, that would be kite string. Kite string is way more versatile. I can use it on pretty much everything that I would use rubber bands on, but unfortunately it's not as economical as rubber bands and it can't be reused as easy, but I use it for more items than I would for rubber bands. And also it's cheaper than sinew, so I would use it in place of sinew. I wouldn't necessarily use sinew for something where I don't necessarily have to have a precise line. Some other items that I use when I'm tying my things. are hemostats or forceps. They are locking, almost like pliers. They're like locking pliers, but they look like scissors a little bit and they lock into place. They are expensive. I have enough to do probably about 2 items. So they're not overly, it's not that they're hard to use, but I can do so few items at a time with them. I generally choose to do them for specialty things. I like to use them if I'm making, say, a sunflower or something that has petals, like a flower of some sort. I like to use them because they will make pretty sharp looking lines. You do have to be careful. A lot of the hemostats that I have sharp edges. A lot of people use a shrink tubing that's used for electrical applications to cover the ends of them and heat it up, and it shrinks onto the hemostat to keep it from ripping your fabric. You can also use a plasti dip to dip the ends of them in so that the edges of the hemostats are not sharp. Sometimes you can file down the item. I find that I try using stuff like that, but it doesn't necessarily hold up for a long time. So I really try to be very careful when I'm using the hemostats and make sure that the edges don't catch on any of the fabric. They are expensive. Oh, another thing is if you clamp them down too tightly, they can break. And also sometimes they have a tendency to spring off of the product. So you got to be careful if you do use them and you clamp them down too tightly, they can spring off and hit you. So that's something to definitely be cautioned with if you're going to use hemostats. They are nice to use for certain applications, but it's not something that I use a real lot. The next item that I have that I use, and I use these more frequently, are wooden barbecue skewers. You can buy them pretty much anywhere. They're pretty easy to find and they're pretty cheap. What I use them for is when I'm pleating up an item and it's say I'm going from the bottom of a shirt to the top of a shirt and I want the pleats to be uniform and I want them to stay flat. I will put a skewer underneath and on top and then hook them together with rubber bands to hold the pleats down in a specific area. That I find is they are pretty easy to use. I can also reuse them a lot of times. And if I have an item that's small enough, I'll break them in half. I will hook the skewers, one on the bottom of the item and one on the top. And what I can do is hook it with a rubber band on the ends, wrap the rubber band around the ends. I can slide the rubber bands up to the clothing. And then I can also squish the clothing and pull it tight on itself, and then wrap a rubber band around the other end of the barbecue skewer and push the rubber bands up so that it holds the fabric in place underneath, and it's also not going to cup or buckle the pleats. They are really good in conjunction with using with other types of things, such as the kite string to finish off the rest of the item, or rubber bands. I use the barbecue skewers mainly for when I make an item such as a Z pattern that I use. What do you guys use? Do you guys use anything other than the items that I have mentioned? And if you do, please post some suggestions down in the comments below. Let me know what you use if you use something different. I will see you again next time, and thank you for watching. I'm Jen, and this is Sugary Tie-Dye Talk.